Good morning. This is the BLAINESWORLD podcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You get more information, listen to previous shows on our website, which is behind me, www.blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. Each week, we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And to that end, it's my pleasure to introduce Michael Spremulli. If I have the name right, Michael?
That sounds wonderful. Thanks so much, Blaine. Pleasure to be here.
Well, it's my pleasure to have you. And Michael is a vibrational astrologist. And Michael, you can feel free to wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this.
Hello, hello.
Okay, that's Michael. I should mention that Michael Spremulli is a professional astrologer with almost 30 years of interpreting astrology charts. And so, Michael, what you started when you were 7? Was that it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're too kind.
Okay. What sets him apart from other astrologies is his scientific approach to the subject. He views and participates in current vibrational astrology research, which is happening at a brisk pace. And so the first question I ask people, Michael, is, as a child, you grew up where?
I grew up in South Florida.
Okay. As a child growing up in South Florida, did you always know you wanted to be a vibrational astrologist?
No, absolutely not. If you would have told me that, many, many years ago, I won't say how many, I'd say, yeah, okay, you're crazy. So life has an interesting way of unfolding.
So talk a little bit about your background, which I personally find kind of fascinating. So how did you get into this whole field?
Well, it's interesting because it actually did start in Hollywood, Florida. So I was between my undergraduate and graduate years at university, was working at a hospital down there, and my life was in a little bit of flux. I didn't have an exact plan of where I was headed, and a colleague of mine at work gifted me a reading with a professional astrologer. Now, I had never been to an astrologer before. The only thing I knew about astrology were what you read in the paper, which, by the way, is nothing like professional astrology. We can get into that later. And I was a little hesitant to have the reading because I was raised in a faith-based system that was like, oh, no, you can't do that. So I felt a little conflicted, but as you probably surmised, I had the reading and it changed my life. This was back in 94. I remember it like it was yesterday. It's just me sitting across the desk from this middle-aged woman at the time, and with nothing more than my birth date, time, and location, she proceeded to summarize my life up till that point, explain current situations and challenges that I was facing at that moment, and then went on to go and give me some forecasting for the next months and year ahead. And it totally exposed me to a whole new world because she was describing things with such accuracy, and I didn't ask a single question during that consultation. I just said, tell me about me, because I don't know anything about this. So that's what whet the appetite. But then I went to graduate school where, astrology and my master's is in clinical psych. Those two worlds don't normally agree. So I started studying astrology while working on my master's degree, but kept it to myself. Fast forward to the early 2000s. I really had the bug bite me deep, so to speak, and was adding to my library. And then I got my hands on some professional astrology software. And that's when the floodgates opened, because I just dived in. And at that point, way out of graduate school, started working, doing pre-employment personality assessments for companies, which I still do to this day. But the whole time I'm diving into astrology more deeply. And I started running charts on family, friends, or anyone within a 100-mile radius who would give me their birth date, time, and location, because you need all three of those things in order to run a valid chart. And I would meet with folks and tell them what I saw in their chart and took my stab at some forecasting. And then something very interesting occurred. People were coming back to me 4, 6, 8 months later saying, hey, could you do that transit thing again to give me an idea of what I can expect over the next several months? I'll pay you for it. And I said, okay, sure. So I ended up developing a side hustle before the term side hustle was even coined. And I was kind of doing this very quietly and had a small book of business, never did advertise. It was people who found me because, yeah, I had a foot in the corporate world, and I felt that the worlds need to be separated until about 2015, where I ran into the work of David Cochran, who is the father of modern vibrational astrology. He is the guy who's been researching this branch of astrology, because there are many different systems in astrology out there, probably over 30. I never stopped to count them up. But he started looking into vibrational astrology in the early 1970s
Well,
and would run charts. Go
yeah,
ahead.
no, let me jump in just before we go further. So you mentioned the term, I mentioned it as well. What exactly is vibrational astrology?
Well, we're going to get there. I'm
Okay.
heading. I'm taking you down the path here.
Okay.
So here's one of the ways that VA is different from other systems. It is the only form of astrology that is evidence-based. In other words, there's actual research behind it to validate its claims. So one of the there are many ways that VA is different from other forms of astrology. And before any other astrologers who hear this come after me with pitchforks, I'm not knocking other systems. Everybody finds a system that works best for them. And there are many of them, as I said. The one issue I always had with astrology is when things didn't seem to line up, there'd always be an effort or an encouragement to try to crowbar something in there, even if it really didn't fit. And with my data science background, that didn't sit with me. But VA is different because it's based on an evidence-based model. And what that means is the research that's been conducted and is currently being conducted in VA is very similar to the type of processes that are put in place when they're doing genetic research and other extreme case sampling type of models. Medicine is an evidence-based model. Evidence-based practices and nursing is another. They're everywhere. So the main difference between VA and other forms of astrology is traditional astrology, Western, Placidus, Vedic, a lot of the other systems, they're built on these archetypal systems. The moon represents our mother. Saturn represents our father. Okay, well, there's something to that. But the problem is those archetypes have to come out of somewhere. And what VA does is look at the underpinnings of, well, where do these archetypes develop? Because we're studying energy in vibrational astrology. We don't use planetary rulers and a lot of the language that's just outdated for today. We're simply looking at what processes do each of the planets and luminaries regulate. And based on that, we're looking at energy flow. And if I had to summarize vibrational astrology in one sentence, it's this. All vibrational astrology does is it shows you what is the optimal way that energy is designed to flow for you. And that's going to be different from anyone else in the world. And when we know how the energy is supposed to flow and what cosmic circuits we have in our natal chart, that enables us then to make decisions impacting things from relationship to career to timing and a host of other issues.
So describe the process then, Michael. Somebody catches this podcast and we'll tell them how to get in touch with you afterward. Mm-hmm. Then what happens? We call you up and then what do you do?
Yeah, so it actually starts before I get on the phone with them. There are three critical pieces of information that every astrologer needs, but even more so for vibrational astrologers, and that is an accurate birth date, the day that you were born, birth time, which is very important, especially when we get up into the higher vibrations and octaves, because a difference of 5 minutes could have radical implications, and birth location. With that information, I'm then able to create a person's natal chart as well as these vibrational charts that really dive into every area in a person's life. And depending on what the person wants to focus on, that's where I'll do a bunch more research or a deeper dive into a person's chart. So it's always driven by the referral question, meaning if someone wants to know about relationships, there's certain areas that we look at in VA that are going to get right to that information. If someone's interested in career, that's a different section. So I like to say that when we're looking at an astrology chart, it's like holding the person's entire cosmic life in your hands. And depending on what we want to focus on, that's where we look, because you can literally talk about someone's chart for an endless period of time. So it's a matter of focusing in on what's important to the client, what their concerns are, and then looking at how that ripples out through the natal and these vibrational or harmonic charts.
What if somebody tells you they don't know what time they were born? How do they find that out?
Well, the first thing is you need to find out what time you're born, or I can't work with you, because that's a core fundamental piece. Believe it or not, most people know what time they're born. Now, if they don't know, a couple of places where folks can often find out is ask relatives. There's always some crazy relative in the family, Uncle Louie, Aunt Mary. Oh yeah, you were born at exactly 7:14. Someone often knows. If they don't know, I say consult your baby book. Back in the day, parents used to have baby books where they would write the milestones down, and it usually starts with the date and time of your birth. If you're still coming up empty, you can often contact the hospital where you were born and request an accurate birth certificate, a certified copy. And if you're born anytime after, I'd say, the 1950s, 98% of those will have a valid birth time stamped in them. If they don't have a valid birth time, I can't work with you. Other methods of astrology may be beneficial, but it's just an essential piece of information, because something is different. You can't just round up to like, well, it's between 10 and 11. Doesn't work.
Because you have me curious now, and I just made a note to myself to check my birth certificate, because I was born in 49. But
you should have a time.
It might be on.
You should have a time on there, because my dad was born in 44 and he had a time. So at that stage of the game, a lot of hospitals were recording times on there. So I bet it would be on there if you go to look.
Now, talk about, you just mentioned your dad. Are readings ever done like after the fact, or like, did you ever do a reading, for example, on your dad?
Well, I didn't. He passed back in 2018. But the thing is, the thing about astrologers is we're one of the only people, to my knowledge, that can legitimately move forward and backwards in time.
I was going to say, you're right.
And the reason for that is because it's all calculated. We know exactly where the planets were and where they're going to be due to the laws of the universe. And we can tell exactly what planetary configurations were in place, what are happening now, and what's happening tomorrow. In fact, tonight, at the date that we're recording this, Neptune is going to be visible in the sky, but I digress. So you're able to go back and look at previous trends. And a lot of times people will say, I had a really rough time 10 years ago. Well, I can go back and look and see what aspects they were dealing with at that point in time. And aspects are simply what's going on in the sky. That's how the planetary movement of the current moment impacts our birth chart or our natal chart. So we can move backwards and forwards in time to see what planetary energies were at play during a specific time frame.
Now, do you do this on yourself as well? In other words,
oh, I'm in my chart every day because I can, but you don't need to take it down to that level of granularity. When I work with folks, in fact, I had several clients today that I spoke with before I got on this interview with you. We generally look at the next, I'd like to say 6 months to a year, or if someone has specific dates, we can hone in on those. But I'm always looking to see what's going on, because I always know what's going on in the sky. I know where the moon cycles are. We just had a new moon earlier in the it was last week, I believe. So that's starting full moons at the end of the month. So I'm very cognizant of what's happening in the sky and then how that's impacting my personal chart, as well as those who are close to me. And I got family members who say, hey, tell me what's going on this date. I got a big business meeting and I got to know, what the general tone of things is going to be.
By the way, how important is that, Michael? In other words, somebody has a big business meeting coming up, or they have a relationship issue. Mm-hmm. How valuable is it to contact a Michael Spremulli or another vibrational astrologist?
Well, it depends. Here's the thing. I don't want anybody dependent on me. And I liken a lot to what I do to be very similar to a weather report. Just like you're not dependent on the weather report, weather reports can be very helpful. And here's what I mean. There's a lot of misconceptions around astrology. And a lot of people think, oh, if I look into astrology, my fate is sealed and I have no, that's just simply not the case. We have free will as individuals. Just like with a weather report, we have free will to listen to that weather report or not. So if you look at a weather report that shows it's going to be raining on Saturday, but you had planned to go to the park and have a picnic, guess what? You can still go to the park and have a picnic. You might get wet, but you could still go. So with astrology, it's helpful as a mechanism to give you an idea of what the cosmic weather is going to be like in or around a particular date or time frame. And it gives us an overall tone as to what to expect. And an example of that could be, and I'll make this very practical. Mars has to do with Mars is the planet of intensity and action. It spurs us to want to accomplish things and get things done. Well, if someone is going to, let's say in business, launch a new marketing campaign or debut a new product or bring something out and communicate that out into the world, we want to make sure that Mars, which is the planet of action, is connected in some favorable way to the planet Mercury, which is communication and ideas and information. Now, I don't want to get too much in the weeds here because it's very easy to do. So I'm going to keep this at a high level. If those planets are playing nice together and things are directed outward, that's an optimal time to bring a message to the world. But if either one of those planets might be going retrograde or might be aspecting with some other planets that could have a different type of energy, then you may want to wait and reevaluate as far as when you bring that message out into the world.
How long should you wait?
Well, it depends on what aspects are coming down the pike. It's not a matter of, oh, is it on or off? Because the planets in the sky are always changing. They're always moving, which means they connect with different circuits in our natal chart, depending on what planets we have stamped in to our cosmic DNA, if you will. So it depends on when aspects are favorable or maybe not so favorable. And I think that brings up another point that I want to address. When I'm talking about a birth chart or a natal chart, that is a snapshot of the sky at the moment that you were born in the location that you are in. That never changes. That is like your cosmic blueprint or cosmic DNA. And we have lots of opportunities to accomplish different things. And we have different circuits or connections, if you will, that are baked into our natal chart. More than we'll ever need in a lifetime. But what evolves and creates certain opportunities is how the planets in the sky, which are always moving, how those form angular relationships to what's going on in your natal chart. And that's where a professional astrologer can help people make sense of that, because that's when the power of this really comes full force, when we're able to look at how the planetary transits are aspecting with natal chart placements. And that's where opportunities are created. And also sometimes we might need to slow down and reevaluate and maybe not forge ahead in certain areas.
Michael, if you would talk about some of the things that people should think about contacting an astrologer for.
So the most common, as you might expect, career advice, looking at, hey, I'm looking to make a change. What am I meant to do in this world? And with vibrational astrology, we can identify those overall themes pretty quickly. One of the consults I did today was about, it kept coming up in this person's chart, these multiple vibrations, that they were designed and they were wired and they had this predisposition to make grand, sweeping, progressive changes in the world that they live in. And without getting too much into detail, because I treat confidentiality very, very seriously, this person's involved with some organizations where they're trying to bring progressive change and impact things on a large scale. So that's one example. Career. Business owners oftentimes will contact me very quietly and discreetly. They tend not to want that to get out for whatever reason, and that's cool. And saying, hey, I'm thinking about either opening a second location or adding something new, or it could be, a bunch of different things. What does the timing look like for that? Relationships, of course, is another thing. Am I compatible with this person who I'm currently seeing? Pretty much anything that involves life situations and circumstances astrology can give you that additional layer of insight. But I want to say this is important, and that astrology is not the answer. It is simply a tool to help you get to the answer. Astrology is not the end all be all. It's another data point. And then it's up to us as individuals to either incorporate that data or not, or maybe think or expand or whatever. But astrology is not the end point, but just a way to help us figure out and bring into focus what's going on, especially if we're feeling a little confused.
Go back to the one you just mentioned, fascinating example about a relationship. So people come to you. Do they ever get told something they don't want to hear? It's, how do you phrase it? How do you kind of give the advice in that?
Sure. So, and that's a good question. So it comes down to what type of relationship are we talking about? Because I've done charts before for people who were getting ready to form a business. That's a lot different than a romantic relationship. So dependent on the relationship itself, what we do is we'll look at where's a person's strongest area of their charts, specifically their vibrational charts. And I'll just give you a general example. Let's say someone has a section of their vibrational charts where they're really wired and energized and activated to go out and serve the community. That's just part of who they are. They like helping others, putting other people's needs ahead of their own. And that's a very strong piece for them. And they're in a relationship, or about to be, and this could be personally, professionally, romantically, and they want to know, hey, is this person going to share the same enthusiasm that I do for engaging in community activities? I'm able to then look at both parties and see, is there overlap in these different vibrations, and is there some resonance? Because vibrational astrology, when we're talking about energy, we are literally talking about energy and frequency and things that are way more complex than I think we want to get into here. But my role is to say, well, look, this is an area where the two of you are going to really jive and vibe, bad pun intended. And here's an area where you're very strong in this particular thing, but the person we're looking at this against you, comparing you with, they may not have as strong of an interest there. And that could be okay, as long as they have interest in other areas that could end up complementing each other. So it's very much a situational type of thing, where it's based on what is the relationship, where are they looking for that compatibility, and what's important to the individual who's asking the question.
Is that tough for you to have to tell somebody that, their thoughts or process isn't consistent with what you're reading? You mentioned the relationship, for example, that you want a perfect match, I guess, and then sometimes
there's no perfect match. So let's get the term perfect match off the table. What we're looking for is, do we overlap and match, resonate, whatever term you want to use, in the critical areas? Here's another example. One of the vibrations that we look at looks at where a person gets restless if they're not able to do stuff. Okay, and I'm just really just oversimplifying this. And let's say you've got someone, and we know people like this in our lives, they run at a high idle. They're always doing something. They're going somewhere. They got something going. They got this deal happening. They're meeting people, shaking hands, kissing babies. And that's the way they operate. All right. But if they're partnering with someone who doesn't have that same intensity level, that's information they need to ask themselves. So it's not a matter of me saying, don't do this, or don't marry this person, or don't get involved with business. My goal is to say, here's how you are wired to behave. Here's how the person who we're looking at is wired to behave, whether they're similar or different. My job is to present the data, and then it's up to the individual to say, well, I can live with someone being maybe a little calmer than me in this area, but that community thing that we spoke about before, that's a non-negotiable. If they're not interested in helping their community, which is a big part to me, and I'm saying this as the role of the client, then that could be a deal breaker. So it's not up to an astrology to say, marry, don't marry, partner, don't partner. I view it from the standpoint of, I'm presenting information. I'm the weather report.
What do you tell people who say their belief in astrology is tied to what they read in the newspaper every day, when they used to have newspapers?
Yeah,
I guess online.
Exactly. So it sounds like you're asking about the daily horoscope.
Right.
Mm.
Do people still read that stuff?
Well, to some degree, but I've got an opinion on that, as you probably surmised that I would. But first off, I do daily forecasts, okay, but they're not horoscopes in the traditional sense, and those can be found at TikTok, Blue Ridge Astrology. You just search on that moniker. I do dailies; they're free, of course. I interact with people. But here's the deal with horoscopes in the papers. When you look at horoscopes, you've got a sentence or two to convey a general message to a huge amount of people. They're going to be general. They have to be general. And I liken those type of horoscopes, and I'll put mine in there as well, as the junk food of the astrology world. And here's what I mean by that. We all like our favorite junk food. Some of us could be French fries. Others, it could be candy. For me, it's donuts. And a little bit of junk food, it's not a big deal, not going to hurt you. But you don't want to make a steady diet of junk food. So I think daily horoscopes can be helpful in some ways, just to kind of get maybe a general tone of the day, but that's going to vary based on individuals and how that applies to you based on what's happening in your birth chart. That's what makes it personal. So when you're looking at these dailies, I often tell people, if you make any major life decisions based on what you see on anybody's daily forecast, including my own, then you're an idiot, because it's just too general. It's not meant for that. But that is so different compared to what happens in a professional astrology consultation. Because as I mentioned, I will spend, an hour speaking to the client, but I'm doing an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours worth of prep, digging into the charts, running these calculations, and it's so much more personalized than anything you can get from a general forecast that you see online or in the paper. But that's what people know about. So I put them out there just to give people a general tone of the day, and it's going to vary based on what's activated in your own chart, but you don't want to make any major life decisions based on any broad-based horoscope. But they are fun.
Talk, Michael, if you would, about the process then, that somebody is listening to this podcast or watching it. They want to contact Michael Spremulli. We'll talk about that in a second. But what actually happens? And so I have to dig up the three things you mentioned.
Right.
I have to have that before I even speak to you. And I have that. I give that to you. Then what happens? Do you speak to me on the phone, in person?
So everything, the one good thing that came out of the pandemic is now everybody knows about Zoom. So I don't do any more in-person stuff for a bunch of reasons. It's actually more efficient for me, and I could be more helpful to do it this way because I can record the consultation. I can pull up different things on the screen. I do via Zoom. For those of you who are listening to the audio format of this and can't see, there's a video version of this podcast, so go find it. So what happens is I start going to work on the chart as soon as I get that information. And then we'll meet on Zoom. And I always ask the person, as I mentioned before, what it is you want me to primarily focus on. I will generally look at the overall highlights and things that jump out to me as being the most pronounced in a person's chart. And then we go through and explain this basic circuitry. And then if they're interested in, well, what's my 3, 5, 6 month or 1 year plan, then I could start looking at what transits are coming down the pike for them and letting them know when their cosmic weather is expected to shift. And it's a conversation. It's not just me telling them all about themselves. I can certainly do that, but I'll ask questions. For example, in a consult today, I said, from what I'm seeing here, it looks like that you can get a little opinionated at times and may have a hard time adopting other people's points of view. And there was silence for a second. And then they looked at me and said, yeah, that's true. I said, well, how is that working for you? And then we end up discussing that. So it's a very fluid conversation, depending on what the client wants to dive into. My role is to hold up various slates of information, so to speak, and then we can dive into whatever needs to be fleshed out or explored at a more deeper level. I'm sorry. I was going to say the end result is the client then comes away with having some confirmation on whatever is important to them, at least in their natal chart, and where they thought they should be headed versus maybe new opportunities that exist, and then knowing what to expect over the next weeks and months ahead.
How long does that conversation take?
I'm usually my basic readings are like an hour and 15 minutes. Business readings, if I'm doing corporate charts, they're a little longer. But the first part, I always like to explain just a little bit of how this type of astrology is different from what they're normally probably accustomed to. Another way that vibrational astrology is different is, and this is going to blow some minds out there. So again, other astrologers listening, I'm not coming after you, so don't come after me. We don't use signs and houses all that much in vibrational astrology. Now, signs are what everyone knows: Aries, Taurus, Cancer, Gemini, the sun signs. Those signs and house cusps, they have a little bit of significance, but the data indicates that the magic really happens based on planetary aspects, midpoints, and a bunch of other geometric configurations that occur. So it is not uncommon for me to do a whole reading and never mention a sign or a house at all. And people often say, I've never had an astrological reading like that before, and it's much more specified. And I think that's ultimately what attracted me to VA, because I can get to the issue quick. I don't need to speak to someone for 30 minutes to find out where the hot spots are. We have techniques to figure out where those hot spots are right out of the gate. And then we can dive further in based on the client's direction.
If somebody wants to find out more, either about you or vibrational astrology, what should they do?
Easiest thing is visit blueridgeastrology.com. That's blueridgeastrology.com. I live here in the Blue Ridge Mountains, so I figured it's a very appropriate name. On the website there, you can learn about the readings that I offer. And I also offer what I refer to as monthly transit reports. We can talk more about that in a second if you want, where basically it's a computerized analysis and interpretation of where the planetary transits are in relation to your chart. I'm also on all the socials as well: Facebook, Instagram. TikTok is what I recommend, though, because you can learn a lot about VA just by going back and watching my previous forecasts, because they're short, about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and you can just jump in and you'll start to learn what the planetary regulation, what planets are regulating what processes. And it's a great spot to kind of get your feet wet. And that's also Blue Ridge Astrology. I come up pretty quickly on any of those places.
You told me off the air something which has me interested in, but you mentioned these, what do you call them? The 30-day process.
The transit report, the personalized transit report. Yes.
So what exactly is a transit report?
Okay, so that's a very good question. Remember, our birth chart never changes, but what is always moving are the planetary rotations in the sky. They're in different orbits, they're moving forward, they're moving backwards. So a transit report gives you just a bullet whenever there is something substantial happening in your own birth chart for a 30, 60, or 90-day period. And it explains it in very simple English. And I've got samples out there on the website so people can see. I think I have Dolly Parton as an example, that I have a sample of what this report looks like. And it gives you a little, think of it as a personalized daily forecast. Again, don't go making any major life decisions, but it gives you an idea of what the tone is going to be specific to you. And that's the difference in these personalized transit reports versus any forecast that I do online, because we need your birth date, time, and location. And with those, we do have a little bit of leeway. If you don't have a birth time, we can do some approximation because it's different than a reading. But then what happens is then you can just look each day to see, is there anything going on? And think of it as your personal cosmic weather report, and it'll let you know what planet is aspecting your natal chart and give you the general tone of the day. And a lot of people find those helpful just to kind of do as part, look at that as part of their morning routine and see what's going on.
How often should somebody get these transit reports?
Well, they can get them as much as they like. I mean, I offer them as little as 1 month up to a whole year. And what I always say to someone is, if they're just dipping their toe in the water, get a 1 month transit report. But I got a special offer for your people. Should I just go ahead and mention that now?
But before you mention the special offer, which
Yes.
I do want you to mention, you mentioned the transit report. You mentioned 30 days. Can you get a daily transit report or?
Well, it is. When I say 30 days, it covers a span of 30 days.
Oh, I got you.
So what happens is it'll actually give you, now, every day is not going to have something happening unless there's something aspecting. A lot of times there will be, the moon moves very fast and Mercury zipping all over the place. So you'll see, the best thing is if people are saying, I can't kind of conceptualize this, go over to Blue Ridge Astrology, click on where it says astrology reports, and you can look at the sample, and a picture's worth 1,000 words.
And we'll take you up on your generous offer. You mentioned to me off the air that
Yes.
I'm fascinated by this. Before I take you up on it, I have to go and check my birth certificate and get the
Right.
time. I know the date, I know the location, but check that birth certificate. If I have that information, what are you offering people to do?
So, and again, this is not, I'm not looking to, blatantly promote here, but I do sell like a 1 month transit report is $10. You can go see that on the website. However, because I'm on your show and I live in your town, I'm going to give anyone who wants one for the next little while. I can't do this in perpetuity.
Sure.
But if you want a 1 month free transit report, that's free, FREE. All you got to do is plug in a coupon, and which I'm going to give you in a second. You can get a 1 month transit report on me by using the code B as in Blaine's W World. So BW, that's all you got to remember. Plug that in at checkout, and that'll zero out that $10 charge to nothing. Limit 1 per person. Don't be greedy. And it's for a 30-day transit report, and you can go ahead and do that. Again, depending on how many respond here, I'll have to cut that off at some point. So get them while they're hot. And
I'll just tell you, Michael, you'll know because we'll put it up on the blog. I'll put in the introduction as well. We'll put it up on the on posting this podcast. I'll also mention my blog. So I'd say, Michael, at the most it'd be a month and maybe even less, but I'll try to get the word out.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, let's go 30 days from the date that this thing goes live. How does that sound?
Fair enough. And you'll know it because it will go live probably tomorrow and the next day.
Excellent.
I'll also then put you in my blog as well. So we'll get the word out.
And I will say, let me just go on record by saying, normally I spin these around pretty quick, but I'm expecting a huge influx because whenever, I make an offer like this, there's usually a surge. You got to give me some time because I prepare every one of these. So allow up to a week for processing. Most often you'll get it sooner, but bear with me. And if the coupon's activated, you will get your report.
And I want to thank you for the offer because, again, what I'm hearing you say is all you need are 3 things. You told me, the name, date, birth, location, and time. And if you have that, you're in business. Michael, fascinating stuff. Vibrational astrology. If folks want to know more about it, best bet, again, go to the website probably or TikTok you mentioned.
Correct. BlueRidgeAstrology.com or just Blue Ridge Astrology. You search on me. I'm very easy to find.
Okay, very cool, Michael. I want to thank you for being my guest on this edition of Blaine's World podcast.
Thank you.
I haven't seen you for a long time, but good seeing you. And I also want to thank my producer, Cappy Tassetti. And hopefully we'll see you maybe in person sometime next bit of time, Michael.
Hey, anything could happen.
Okay, buddy. Stay with me. I'm
you.
going to sign off now and then stay with me for a second afterwards. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks.